So my research really begins about 5 or 6 years ago when I myself came out as transgender. I was terrified of having to leave sports, and so I postponed my medical transition in order to compete on a women's team. When I graduated back in 2020, little did I know that the landscape around trans athletes would have changed so rapidly, and trans athletes would be subject to such public debate about fairness. However, there's limited empirical research on competitive trans athletes, and the majority of opinion pieces are written by cisgender authors. So to address this gap, I conducted in-depth interviews with 13 trans athletes competing in the NCAA. They compete at all 3 levels and play 7 different sports. In my interviews, I asked participants about their experiences overall in college, the process of coming out to teammates and coaches, sharing physical spaces like locker rooms and bathrooms, and their thoughts on the state of trans athletes overall. I transcribed each interview by hand and then uploaded them into the coding software MaxQDA for analysis, where I followed Charmaz's grounded theory approach. I've grouped my findings into 3 main categories. So first, in terms of becoming a trans athlete, these participants spoke about how they came out, they started playing their sport at a very young age and didn't come out until much later. And because sports are so highly gendered, this meant that they had to make important decisions around their own transition and being able to stay in sports. Staying on a women's team meant that they had to postpone hormones, but switching to a men's team wasn't always possible or wasn't desired. Secondly, I used the term feedback loop to describe how decisions around social and medical transition and decisions around sport often occurred simultaneously and impacted one another. So participants, one swimmer told me about how he purposely avoided mirrors after coming out and ended up switching or seeking chest surgery in order to feel more comfortable in the locker room and in the pool. Finally, participants talked about the role of support at multiple levels, so teammates, coaches, athletic administration, and policy on paper, and they expressed how they just felt it was easier to be transmasculine, right? One swimmer saying, "I'm the kind of trans they don't care about." However, in my paper, I argued that they still experience sport as trans athletes, and they're still indeed impacted by policy, as evidenced through repeated hormone testing, paperwork, and surgical waivers. So where does this leave us? Well, I argue that these athletes are only able to compete because transmasculine athletes aren't seen as a threat. But policy is not the same as true inclusion. And we must continue to do more empirical research, as well as look at the experiences of trans feminine athletes.